Everyone, welcome back to the Weekly Politics Show. I'm Councillor Premier with co-host Councillor Andrew Rood. So in this section, we're going to talk about the mixed developments in Tower Hamlets. Are they designed for social housing? Now, mixed development is where you have a single block, where you have, say, private tenants or private owners in the same building as social housing tenants, and they're sharing the same facilities like stairwells or lifts, or sometimes the same entrances. And Andrew, you've sort of like gone on social media to highlight problems of mixed developments in your ward, or around your ward. Do you want to just talk about what you've found, and what you think that the issues are of putting, say, social housing tenants and private tenants in the same building, them sharing the same infrastructure without any adjustments, etc.?
Well, they don't share the infrastructure. That's part of the problem. But we have, you may have seen, if you look towards Canary Wharf, we've got a number of really big new buildings which just opened up in the last few months. So, for example, 75-storey Landmark Pinnacle, 68-storey South Quay Plaza, 55-storey The Wardian, and then another building at 53 stories called the Madison. And I've been hearing stories and problems with all of them, and some of it's teething problems. And what's interesting is with some of these buildings is because they're kind of completing from the bottom up, they actually haven't finished the top bits yet, but the bottom bits are basically the social housing. So in a number of these buildings, it's actually the social housing tenants who are moving in first. And I've been aware of problems, but there was one, and I won't say which one and I'll explain why in a minute, but there's one tower I've come across just in the last couple of days. And I got an email about 2 hours ago from one of the residents who actually is a bit of an expert because of his day job and some of this stuff. And when I read, he listed like 25 problems with the building. And my immediate response is it was not safe to have put residents into that building at this stage of completion. Because basically, I mean, give you one minor example, is that if you're in the basement, the only way of exiting the basement currently, because of the construction that's still going on, is via the lift. But if you have a fire in the building, then the lift gets shut down. So he's basically saying is that you would get trapped in the basement if there was a fire in the building. The front door keeps breaking, and that's a pretty routine issue. And I think one of the problems is, these are, this building is, all of these buildings are over 50 stories. So these are really complex buildings with lots of mechanical and sort of electrical items, and just simple things about how the billing system works for your, heating and electricity. So if in this particular building, if your credit runs out on your account, it automatically switches off your hot water, your heating, and your electricity.
Wow.
Okay, which, wow. I mean, I was shocked when I heard that. But you can't even find out. It's not a question of, you're running out of money. You don't even know whether you've run out of money or not until your electricity shuts off, because you can't get access to the meters. So it's a part of the problem is I don't think we've really thought through the implications of how complex these buildings are. And then the other part of the problem is you've then got different people involved. So the top part of the building is the managing agent, and the bottom part of the building, and I will name them, it's Network Homes of the Housing Association. And they just seem to be completely missing in action on a lot of this stuff. And they just don't seem to be dealing with this stuff. And some of it's teething problems with a brand new building. And some of it does seem to be, some fundamental problems like, how your waste gets removed and all the rest of it. And it's this particular building, it's, as I said, over 50 stories, and the lifts routinely break down. So what happens if you're on the 15th floor and the lift doesn't work? Are you going to walk up and down? And I see on Facebook one of the things that they do, so they tell each other that the lift isn't working, and then people then sort of say, tell me when it's working, and I won't come home until you tell me that it's working. So they stay wherever they are until they know it's safe to come home. And I was astonished and I've only found this out in the last 2 days, so we're still at the really early stages of figuring this all out. And this is a brand new building that's only been occupied since this November of last year. But it's not a fit for purpose home. It's not a safe home. And I think there's lots of other buildings like this.
I'm surprised that the local authority hasn't stepped in. Like, I know that you have to be compliant in terms of construction, in terms of building regulations, and the local authority. I know you could get private thing, but there's some oversight from the local authority. So they have to sign it off. A construction site is under the control of the local authority. Once a local authority signs it off, then people could move in, and then the responsibility goes to the fire authority. Mm-hmm. So it just seems like have we taken our eye off the ball? But it seems for me like have we taken our eye off the ball in terms of when it came to planning as well? Because you've had the issues of Grenfell, where you had social housing in massive tower blocks, and that's kind of like got people thinking like, is it wise for us to have dense kind of social housing? Have we sort of like, well, why is it not picked up? And given the sort of like projections of tall towers going all over Tower Hamlets, have those discussions fed through in terms of planning, Andrew, or have the planners picked it up as well? Or
well, they're going to, because so I got this really good detailed email from one of the residents of the building, and it's a really good email because the person who wrote it knows what they're talking about. So, at 3 or 4 points when I read it, my jaw just dropped because I couldn't believe what he was writing. So they are. So when I forward the email on, which I'll probably be doing this weekend, they will find out. But I think this building is particularly bad. I've seen some of these same issues in other buildings. So it's not like this building is unique. The problem in terms of building control is that the building owners can pick another company rather than the council to sign it off. But we, as Tower Hamlets Council, put it on our housing waiting list, and people were bidding for those properties. So it is on our housing waiting list. So by default, we are involved in the process or the decision to allow people to bid for those properties. And in my view, that property is not fit habitation. Well, it's not safe habitation while it's still being constructed. And it may not be because of some of those fire safety issues. I don't know whether they're issues now because construction hasn't finished on the upper floors, or whether these are systemic issues. So, we are involved even if we didn't sign off the building. And I think this is one of the issues, is we just don't think enough about. So, and we've tried this in the planning process. Some of the other residents, not just me, have made this point, is that we don't think enough about what happens after completion. It's like the planning process ends on the day that people say it's okay to move in, and we don't think enough about what happens thereafter. And we have made some attempts, and we keep getting rebuffed. But I think, looking at this tower, I mean, it's so shocking, some of the things that people are experiencing. I think that's going to be much harder to argue against. And some of these things are fixable. It's basically sort of making sure that the building is safe, even if it's being constructed on. So doing some kind of inspection before you say, yes, it's okay for residents to move in. And there's a bunch of other practical things that can be done. Just that we just don't look at these issues as far as I know, we don't look at these issues.
I think it's going to be more and more an issue, but for me, like, it seems like it goes much more fundamental in terms of these buildings are not designed for social housing. So I've been following architecture, and like there was these French guys who won an award because they specifically thought about how people in social housing use the building, and they, instead of demolishing it, they adapted the building, and they won an award for that. But these actual buildings, when they're actually designed by the architects, social housing is not thought about it. It's not there in the forefront. It's basically only afterwards, when they allocate the units, they start thinking about it. And my question is, are these buildings as a whole suitable for social housing? Are we as a planning authority or local authority missing the boat on this? Do we intervene early on and say, you have to basically make requirements for social housing? There has to be some kind of priority in that, or do we say build them off site, for example, instead of putting them in the same building? What's your thoughts on that?
So I've changed my view on this over the years. So my view is places like Marsh Wall, which will be, Manhattan, denser than Manhattan. These are not suitable places for family-sized social housing. Access to cars, basically there is no access to cars, or car parking is kind of one issue. access to playgrounds and kind of all the other things. And these are very tall towers with basically little or no play up. And this one actually will have some playground space outside, but it's next to a busy main road, and it's not really suitable for older children. So my view now is actually what we should be trying to do. So actually a good example would be, so this building would be great if you're in your 20s or 30s, and it's quite high up and you have nice views, a small apartment. It probably work. If we can fix all of those technical engineering problems, it's probably fine. Whereas West Ferry Printworks on the southern part of my ward actually would be a great place for families. So if we could almost engineer something that sort of said, young couples in the north on Longmarsh Wall, more gritty urban area, families more in the south, where it's a bit more open, you've got more space, more water, closer to parks and playgrounds, that would be the ideal solution. But the planning process is not designed in that way, because it basically looks at every building in isolation and assumes each building is the same in the same location. And I think, we've basically built some not great places for people to actually live in, plus all of the build quality issues. And, the fact that the person who wrote me the email says, he moved in months ago and he's only been able to use the bin chute on 4 occasions. Because apparently if you leave one of the doors open on the bin chute, then the whole system shuts down. But it's 53 stories of, so does that mean somebody has to check all 53 stories to check all of the doors are closed before the whole system works? I don't know. But this is also an issue for the private housing as well. Some of these issues are not just for the social housing, they affect the whole building. But I think it's particularly worse for the housing association tenants, because the housing associations, I don't think, are very good at managing these buildings. And the private managing agents are not much better, but they are, I think, generally a little bit more responsive if there are complaints compared to the housing associations.
So before we go to the break, how are you going to propose to bring this to the political agenda, or bring some kind of solution to it? Have you thought about how you're going to basically bring it on the radar of everyone or the council?
Well, this email I got from a resident, I'll top and tail it and add a few bits in, but it's so powerful. And I'll just underline the key points that if people read it, I think it sort of tells the story. But we've got tomorrow, there's an overview and scrutiny work session where we agree what we're going to do for the next year. And I'm going to raise this then. I'll raise this at, the various scrutiny committees. And I forgot to say, so this morning I actually talked about it with Will Tuckley, the Chief Executive Officer at Tower Hamlets Council. And I talked about some of those examples and about how shocked I was by the building. So he's asked his housing team to go have a look and come back to me and Councillor Peter Goals with a response on that one. So it's already been raised at a very high level. And I know the residents themselves, they're complaining, they're trying to find who to complain to. So they're going to the housing ombudsman, and then they found me as well. So they're doing this job as well, not just me, of raising the issues.
Cool. So watch this space, guys. And if you live in one of these buildings, if you're on the island, get in touch with Andrew. If you're in Myland, get in touch with me. I've found similar issues as well in certain blocks in Myland, and let's try to bring a solution to this, and some joint up thinking. So we're gonna go to a break.